I think it's going to be very difficult to get a conviction, but what we're going to see is an extremely long path to getting there. There's going to be hurdles for the prosecution to get over. They're primarily going to have to get through quite a bit of motion practice. I think there's going to be all sorts of legal issues that Trump's team is going to bring forward, and we're going to be covering that, I think, at every stage. There's going to be some new legal theory that comes up that's going to be challenging to the judge, and that's going to be a story that plays out for months and months into the future here. But I think the important point that we know today is that this is about to walk into the criminal process, and we're going to dive deep into whether this actually makes its way in front of a jury or not.
You know, and Will, to you, I'm also kind of curious, you know, these special grand jurors, will we know who they are? And what goes into a vote like that? Does it have to be unanimous?
It is not unanimous. I'm not sure what the specific laws in New York, but it is not unanimous. It has to be a majority of them, but it is not a unanimous decision. And they are generally kept confidential. In fact, their identities are concealed entirely, you know, for their own reasons, for confidentiality. So, yeah, this is a momentous, historic occasion. I think a lot of people, once they get through it, are going to think that these charges are relatively minor. For all the things Trump did, this has to be one of the most minor, acts of misconduct. He was impeached for much more serious offenses, but those crimes would probably have to be tried or accused in a federal court. So certainly, this is it's a momentous, historic occasion. It'll be interesting to see how this affects the election process. There's nothing barring Trump from continuing to run as president, and I expect he will continue to do so.
Yeah, you know, Andrew, to your point, though, this is a sealed indictment. We don't know what it says. Do we know the actual crime that the indictment says is being brought? And will this be unsealed soon so we can see it?
So we don't, it is still sealed, and it's going to be, I hear, a few days before it is unsealed. It's a process, there's a logistic process it goes through with the court itself before it's unsealed and announced. Now, we understand that it is a felony indictment, and so that essentially means that what we've been looking at all along, that the allegation is essentially that there's this violation of a New York business law that requires honesty in the filing of certain business documents, and that's a misdemeanor, and that it has an escalator in that the reason for the lie in the business records, the cover up of the payment, was to avoid election law or campaign finance laws, which would be a federal criminal felony offense, which New York is now using as its escalators. That's the presumption going into it. That's what we've been operating on all along, but we're not going to see that unsealed indictment until I anticipate next week, and until I think the actual surrender occurs. I don't think that it's going to be released ahead of that, but it could.
And Will, let's talk about, you know, when he will have to show up, what this arraignment is going to look like. You know, we were getting some reporting to suggest it could be virtual. It looks like it's going to be in person, but it's not going to be immediate, is it? It's going to be maybe a week from now.
I think that's probably accurate. I mean, there's a lot of logistics here. I mean, you ask me what it's going to look like. It's going to look like a circus is what it's going to look like. They're going to have to, negotiate with the Secret Service, with Trump's lawyers to make this thing go down. So, yeah, it's going to be a very difficult, interesting process. I would expect it'll probably happen next week. I think they're going to try to do this as efficiently as possible without making it more of a circus than it's going to be.
Yes, and we're just looking at the exteriors there in South Florida of Mar-a-Lago, and we also have kind of a roving camera there in New York. Andrew, legally, these implications aside, you're in New York. I don't know if you've been down to Lower Manhattan, recently, but is it just a circus there throughout the last couple of weeks? Or, because remember, and I think, Will, you and Andrew have been following this, yesterday we were told this wasn't going to happen possibly until late April or May, and then we got the news today. So, your thoughts on that, Andrew, first?
I was down there last week, standing right outside in the midst of all of the media there. It is certainly a media circus in the park across the street from the courthouse there. I think that we have just scratched the surface on the circus that's yet to come. You know, Donald Trump is a master at creating publicity around anything that happens to him, kind of a stalwart of the no press is bad press. He likes any press coming his way. There's been theories and rumors that he doesn't want to surrender, that he wants this to go down in some sort of dramatic arrest and you know, where he's being perp walked into the courthouse. That is all on the table as a possibility. He's classic for not following the advice of his attorneys, and he loves to have a circus and as much publicity as possible. Perhaps he wants to be seen as a true martyr in this, and I think that being walked in handcuffs could be exactly the sort of thing that he's desperate for in terms of just the ultimate amount of attention that he could gather as a result of this. Now, is that a good showing? The people who hate him, I'm sure, would say no, but the people who love him may be brought into a frenzy over seeing their beloved president in handcuffs.
Yeah, and no, Will, to you, we have also been, following so closely all of these investigations. You name-checked some of them, the special grand jury down there in Fulton County in Georgia, looking into interference in the 2020 election. Obviously, the special counsel, Jack Smith, with the classified documents case, with the January 6th probe. Being indicted now, how does that factor in? Does it at all?
It's a good question. I think these prosecutors are just going to be lining up to bring charges against him. I have to believe the Fulton County, Georgia case is about to pop as well. So to me, that's probably the next one, that's the next domino that's going to fall. I think they're just going to line up. They're going to have to take a number in terms of when they're going to, prosecute Donald Trump, because he has a long list of things. Here's the other thing. He could easily be charged with sedition for that recorded phone call where he tried to get Ukraine to bring charges against Biden. That would seem to be an easy federal case. I haven't heard a whisper of that. And to me, that's the really problematic one. In this New York case, his prison exposure is relatively low. But with the sedition matter, that's, he's looking at 20 years. So, there are a lot of more dominoes that could fall for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and just let's focus just on this case too. When it comes to any type of detention, I've been hearing from our legal experts that is completely off the table. That they possibly won't even make a bail offer. Andrew, have you heard that?
Well, nothing specific exactly in terms of what I anticipate in terms of no bail offer or not, but I don't think there's any possibility that he's put in some sort of pretrial detention over this. Yeah. I think that would be a totally incredible path to go down, especially given the standard operating procedure in Manhattan and the way that the state is handling criminal acts and the bail and reform type efforts that they've had up to this point. So no, I don't think that there's any chance of that, and I think that as we move forward, that it's going to be something that is scheduled out. We're going to know when he's going to have to be present versus when his attorneys are going to be present. I don't think that we're going to see him all that often in a New York courtroom after his initial arraignment that happens kind of concurrently with the surrender that we, as we're talking about, may happen as early as perhaps early next week or later next week.
So if there's no bail, does there have to be any conditions about, his movements? Obviously, he's on the campaign trail. He has campaign stops. Will any of his travel limit his movement at all because of this?
Well, I think that there's a chance that he could be limited in terms of international travel. Sometimes there are agreements to surrender passports. I don't expect that here. I mean, we have to recognize the unprecedented nature of this. And so anybody who can say that, we've been thinking about this happening, or we have this idea of what might happen here. This is a former president of the United States. He still has an incredibly important role in international politics. He is still a effective spokesperson of the United States in many nations around around the world look to former presidents in that way. There's a long history of that. So to say that this is a person who would be a flight risk, or that this is a person who doesn't have a compelling interest in continuing along in their daily functions, I think would be totally beside the point here. So I think President Trump, former President Trump, as it were, is going to have plenty of autonomy and freedom to go about his normally scheduled activities. There will be very little, I guess, chance that he continues to violate the law, and I think that things like the baseball bat incident in his recent posting on social media, that's the sort of thing that if he does that post arraignment, a judge could review a bail type situation, and maybe that could be escalated. But that's only if there's efforts towards violence or some sort of chaos at his words, that perhaps we could see something become where there is actually a risk of him looking at some pretrial detention.
No, you bring up a very good point. I didn't even think about this. He is so outspoken on Truth Social about all of these investigations. Obviously, that's a headache for whoever is representing him. But could that get him into trouble with this indictment? I think that's a really interesting point there, because he's going to be talking about this at political rallies that he's hosting. He was in Waco, Texas over the weekend. He brought it up. He's been bringing it up on social media. Will, what do you say about that? Is that going to matter into this?
It could, because I noticed that he said some nasty things about Bragg, but he didn't threaten him or anything. If he threatened him or threatened anyone in the legal process, the judge, the prosecutor, that could affect his bail situation. They could increase his bail. They could make it a no bail if they feel he's a threat. So it could play a part. I noticed that he actually changed gears as soon as he heard about the indictment and went after Joe Biden, as opposed to going after Mr. Bragg, the prosecuting attorney. So if he's smart, he will, modify his comments, because if he acts up or says something that could be, interpreted as a threat to someone on the prosecution team, he may find himself behind bars.
And of course, historically, that is not always the case with the former president. He speaks his mind, kind of lawyer strategy be damned. I want to put up the statement yet again from Bragg, his office, and get your thoughts on it, both of you. He says, this evening we contacted Mr. Trump's attorney to coordinate his surrender to the Manhattan DA's office for arraignment on a Supreme Court indictment, which remains under seal. Guidance will be provided when the arraignment date is selected. Andrew, behind the scenes, how much do you think the Bragg office and the Trump team has been in touch over the course of the last several weeks?
Well, there's not a lot to be in touch about. I mean, President Trump was invited to speak to the grand jury, and that was declined. Past that, there's not really a whole lot to talk about. The idea that there's some degree of coordination here for the surrender, that's a courtesy that's being extended. I don't think that's more than a phone call or two. Now, there could be reasons why they're trying to talk more, but I can't really imagine it. This is a case that I see as a very adversarial case. I don't see any deals trying to be cut here. I don't see anybody trying to scratch the other person's back, trying to do somebody a favor. There's no reason for that. In fact, I talked about just a few minutes ago the idea that there's this notion that there will be a surrender, a kind of a coordinated surrender, but I don't think that that's even necessarily set in stone yet here. So perhaps the lawyers want that to happen, and there's some sort of kind of plan for that to occur. But we have yet to see that President Trump is actually going to follow through with that, and not just skip it and say, you want to arrest me, and we'll see what happens. In ordinary cases where there is a criminal defendant who is not being cooperative in the surrender process, a warrant is issued and someone is picked up. So we have yet to see what's going to happen. I don't think that there's a whole lot of coordination, other than if there were, it would just be the two sides bickering at each other.
Yeah. Will, for viewers who haven't been following this, who are now watching and they're witnessing history right now, and they don't know the background, let's go back to the very beginning. Get our viewers up to speed in very, very simple layman's terms here. What was Bragg bringing? What is he alleging that Trump did? What laws does he think Trump violated here?
So this is, as my colleague pointed out, this is basically failing or fraudulently filing a business form. So it's generally a misdemeanor offense in New York. But essentially, what happened is that Michael Cohen, President Trump's lawyer and fixer, paid off Stormy Daniels, who was a porn star who had an affair with Donald Trump prior to the presidency. And then, because it was during the presidential campaign, that went down as an illegal campaign contribution that Trump would have made to his own campaign. So that is sort of the gist of all this. Basically, it was a hush money payment that was made by Mr. Cohen, Donald Trump's lawyer. Now, Mr. Cohen actually testified under oath, lied, ended up going to prison for his role in this affair. And he will be, I imagine, prosecution witness number one when it comes to bringing evidence against Donald Trump. So that's basically what happened in the case.
Yeah, Andrew, if you want to take a stab at that too, then that was a great elucidation there from Will. But you agree, obviously, just to characterize it in your own terms, if you will. We got a lot of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary by Will. What I think that we have to look at here is what some of the evidence is going to be, what evidence is going to be necessary in a case like this. So they're going to have to prove a specific intent on behalf of Donald Trump to file those fraudulent records. And so that means that it's not his lawyer, it's not his accountant, it's not anybody else who acted on their own to assist him. And you have to keep in mind, with somebody as big as Donald Trump, he has a lot of people working beneath him who are taking signals on a very, I guess, delicate or very subtle basis. And so if Donald Trump says something like, make this go away, or I don't want to be dealing with this anymore, I think that's a far way away from the specific intent that's going to be required for the prosecution to prove that he knowingly filed these fraudulent business records. So that's kind of step number one. How are they going to demonstrate Trump's specific knowledge of the fraudulent records? And I think that ultimately that's going to require the credibility and testimony of Michael Cohen. Now, there could be evidence that we don't know about because the grand jury is secret. The evidence that they review is secretive, and some of that won't be given to Donald Trump's lawyers until the discovery begins after arraignment. And so we have yet to see if it's only Michael Cohen's credibility that's going to be on the line and him saying that Donald Trump knew this and directed this, or if there's something else, perhaps a document or an email or a text message from Donald Trump showing that. We're also going to have to see real evidence that this was a campaign finance violation in order for it to be considered a felony. Yeah. And for that, we have to establish that the monies paid to Stormy Daniels were specifically intended to protect the election and the campaign that was going on there, as opposed to a different and separate legitimate interest in making those payments. You can have personal payments that fall outside the campaign. And so that is going to be a question of whether those payments were made to protect his business or to protect his family life, his relationship with his wife. If that's what those payments are for, or if there's even a reasonable doubt as to that, those are no longer things that they can get that felony escalated conviction on.
Okay, but we do know there is a receipt, there is proof of the reimbursement to Michael Cohen from Donald Trump. So we have reported that. That was, I think, back during the Trump years in the White House. My question, though, is how hard is it to prove that this payment could materially impact to a positive benefit the outcome of a presidential campaign? That seems like a very, very hard legal burden to cross. Will, how do they get there?
I don't really believe on the face of it is that difficult to prove. I mean, in our society, generally speaking, extramarital affairs are frowned upon. This extramarital affair involved a pornographic actress. So I don't think that would be particularly difficult to make that argument. So I think clearly it's something that any candidate would want to keep from the public. Of course, Donald Trump had other sex-related scandals during the presidency, which essentially did not affect him in any way. So I don't know if that's maybe an argument his defense team is going to make, like, oh, come on, how this isn't going to affect, that would affect Donald Trump at all.
Right.
But,
So,
I think normally speaking about a regular candidate, that would clearly have something that a candidate would want to not have disclosed because it's going to be obviously damaging.
I just thought of this. I was reading over the weekend, I think in the New York Times, and I think it's a pretty good point. Hush money payments in and of themselves, it's not an illegal concept, right, Andrew? It's how you facilitate the payment, right?
Reaching an agreement, a settlement in a private transaction with someone to not speak on something, that's absolutely normal. I think we have to look at ultimately here, who's the victim? We've got these payments being made, and Donald Trump has asked this before. Yeah. He says he's a victim of extortion. So he's denied the allegations of an affair with Stormy Daniels, and he says that that the demand that was placed on him is extortion. So, at what point does a candidate who's running for office, who has somebody come out of the woodwork and say, if you don't pay me this amount of money, I'm going to say that you committed this illegal act, or that you did this thing that's going to hurt your reputation in the public eye? I don't know necessarily just for the purpose of protecting your campaign as much as it's the idea of extortion.
Okay, so I just want to reset here. We're at about 1:45 to the top of the hour, almost 8 o'clock there in southern Florida. Andrew Cherkasky and Will Bruzzo, legal analysts and experts, join me, and we have been relying on them throughout the course of this coverage here. We're looking at the exteriors of Mar-a-Lago. We also have this live picture there in West Palm Beach on the tarmac there. You can kind of make out, you see the blue tail of that plane with the American flag on it. That is the private plane of former President Trump. It looks like we lost our shots in and around New York here. If you guys could just join us to the top of the hour, we'd really appreciate it. Let's just keep it going here. Will, so when do you foresee that we will see Trump at all? Do you think it is going to be the shot with the scrum of media in New York entering the courthouse in Lower Manhattan? Do you think he's going to be handcuffed? Do you think he'll have to take a mugshot?
With Donald Trump, it's really hard to say. Normally, I would say the first time we would see him would be entering the courthouse in Manhattan. But, Donald Trump may decide he's going to use this for strategic reasons to rally his supporters and say, look how I'm being treated. And maybe he'll have some kind of political rally outside of Mar-a-Lago, or maybe he'll go on TV and make a statement. So I think it's really wide open. I've heard people mention that he may use this as a way to fundraise. And the way to do that would be to address his supporters directly. So I think it's wide open. For sure, we're probably going to see him sometime next week in Manhattan. But I imagine he's probably gathered with his advisors, and he's deciding exactly how he can use this in some strategic fashion.
Yeah, and Andrew, just lastly, I guess, your final thoughts. I think we're going to be speaking a lot in the next couple of days. But where does former President Trump go from here? Do you think he'll, have to make a statement on camera at some point? Do you think he's going to enter a guilty plea, a not guilty plea? What's next?
I think he's going to rally his supporters as much as he possibly can. That's what he's always done. And so I think that it would be foolish to think he's going to do anything else. Even in the couple of days that we've been waiting for this, or the week or so, he was raising millions of dollars last week, predicting that his indictment was coming very soon. Remember, he came out before even Bragg or anything else said that he was going to be indicted. In fact, it seemed as though he was kind of predicting something that was without basis at that point. And it seemed to be, again, for a fundraising effort and to bring publicity that hadn't already been brought to it. So I think that between now and the time he actually surrenders, I would absolutely assume that he's going to be out in front of a camera, making statements for his supporters to contribute and to try to fundraise some more. This is a great opportunity for him to have even more publicity. That's how he sees it, I think. That's how he's demonstrated himself in the past. We're going to see whatever happens with his surrender. I bet we see him out on the steps of the courthouse making more statements. Again, this is just kind of a prediction based on what we've seen of him in the past, to take any opportunity for the grandest form of limelight that he can get. And I think that's exactly exactly what's going on here, and I think it's going to take place now for months and months to come. And ultimately, I think he's hoping for this grand vindication with a not guilty that would likely help him in all sorts of ways with his supporters. So he is not going to shy away from this. I think he's going to be right out in front as much as he possibly can.
Okay. Andrew, I know you have to go. Will, if you don't mind, we can go up to the top of the hour here. You and I can keep chatting. Andrew Cherkasky, thank you so much. In the meantime, though, Will, if Bragg doesn't get a conviction, if, Trump walks on this, then what happens? Will Bragg face any consequences, do you think? Or is this just how, district attorneys, this is how they operate? It's either a win-lose game, right?
Yeah, I don't think anything, if you fail to get a conviction, I mean, there's no question that this happened. There's no question that money was paid, that he had an affair with this woman. I mean, it all makes perfect sense that Michael Cohen was acting at the behest of Donald Trump. So this is not by no means a far-fetched thing. So, even, if the facts were different, prosecutors do lose cases. Most of the time, they don't bring them unless they can prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. In fact, they have an ethical obligation not to bring a criminal case unless they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And so I believe that they think that they have the evidence and that they will be successful.
All right, Will Bruzzo, we do appreciate all of your insight into this. And like I said to Andrew, we'll probably be speaking again in the days and weeks ahead. We appreciate your insight. We'll talk again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.